And good morning, Boquete. Good morning, Cherokee. Good morning to Veronica down in David. And as always, our engineer here in Boquete Bolivar. Again, you're listening to BoqueteNOW Talk Radio on Radio Cherokee 103.3 FM, sponsored by Big Daddy's Grill and ACCB. So we got a fun-packed show for you today and a very informative show. In the hot seat, we have Dave Nichols.
It's not really hot, is it?
No, well, it might be now. I don't know. But so we were talking very briefly, and again, if you caught my typo, it's Shelterbox. It's not
Yes.
Shadowbox.
It's not Shadowbox. That's what you do when you go to the gym.
Right. And Dave and I are both Rotarians, and it's one of the things about live radio outdoors is when you get a big truck coming by, you have to be quiet for a second and let it do its thing. That's a big one too, isn't it? Yeah. You don't see. I live in an old Panamanian neighborhood, and the streets are very narrow. And this big bus came. I'm like, how do you even get? You got to give props to these bus drivers, man. I can barely get my car around that turn. Okay, I think they're gone. But anyway, at our last Rotary meeting, David had given an account of the humanitarian relief effort in Haiti. Yeah, as you know, they had a massive earthquake not too long ago, and you were part of that relief effort. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And thank you for coming here.
Thanks.
So tell us what is Shadowbox?
Okay.
Let's start with that.
Yeah.
Because
I don't know.
Shelterbox.
I don't know anything about Shadowbox.
Yeah, it's like I have this internal autocorrect.
I know. Oh, so it wasn't spell check. It was you.
It was probably me. All right, what's Shelterbox?
So, just real briefly, Shelterbox is a British charity, a nonprofit, and they do work in the disaster field. It started actually in a Rotary club.
Oh, okay.
Because you missed my talk at Rotary. So it started in the Helston Lizard Rotary Club in England. Some Rotarians just saw a need and wanted to do something. They started in 2000. It was their millennial project for the club. A lot of Rotary clubs have projects like we have the Manchichi project
Sure,
here.
yeah.
So a lot of clubs have projects that grow into bigger things. And now it's a really large organization. They start off wanting to serve 8 to 10 people a year because that's what they could afford.
Right.
But basically, they started with a box, and they said, what will we need if our houses got knocked down? And so they need a tent, cooking gear, blankets, and they just went through and got all that. And that became our first shelter box, basically.
Yeah.
And we've grown from that. Now there's other things that we have involved, and we've grown to where we really look at the disaster and see what the people need as opposed to saying, Here's a box. Yeah. So it's a really neat organization. It's fairly small. We're not well known even in the Rotary world, even though we started as a Rotary club. So what we do, our function is we go into a disaster area right afterwards, or people displaced by war or conflict, and we provide emergency housing. So we didn't build houses. We do emergency housing after disasters.
Like the tents you were talking about.
Like the tents. In the case of Haiti, they won't allow us to bring tents in.
Right, yeah, and I remember you explaining that, and that to me was very interesting, and I understand why. People are going to say, well, how come you're not providing tents? And I definitely want to get into Haiti. I had friends of mine that were down there previously. That was several years, more than several years ago, when that big earthquake hit.
Right,
in
2010.
In Port-au-Prince.
Yep.
And
that was our largest. 2010 was our largest response, only behind Syria. We put up 28,800 tents in Haiti after the 2010.
That's not a small thing. I mean, you just said we're not that big, but
as an organization, we're small because there's a lot of volunteers involved. So I'm a volunteer. I'm not an employee. I don't get paid when I go. And right now in the world, there's about 120 of us that are trained to be response team members, what I do in a disaster. And it's about a year-long process. They start, they usually get about 1,000 to 2,000 people applying resumes. At the end of a year, they end up with about 16 to 20 people.
Okay.
It's very intense. System to get involved in the U.S., in North America. You go to a 4-day session in Texas. Basically, they put you through lots of stresses and see if you've got the mindset to do this.
Sure,
A lot of us are type A's, but because we work in small groups, like the group I was just with, there were only 4 of us.
Yeah.
And so I'm not in charge of that group, even though I'm normally in charge of groups when I worked or was in the military.
Right.
So, I'm okay with that. And some people aren't. So they weed those out. Same thing in Australia. New Zealand has a course and a couple in Europe. And then we come together in England for 10 days where they train us on everything we need to know, how to get stuff into customs, how to do the logistics work, how to do the case work. Everything. So there's only 4 of us out there, 2 to 4, and we do everything. And that's what I was doing in the beginning of Haiti. I was on Team 1.
Now, with situations like this, and I don't really have a whole lot of experience with this. I was on a fire department a lifetime ago, and we assisted in disasters, hurricanes and whatnot, but it was very limited. In these some of the areas that you go into, there's a lot of military conflict, a lot of political conflict. You had mentioned that getting the aid past pirates, I guess, highwaymen, or is a problem too. But and I would like for you to take us through, a typical thing. But what was interesting to me is why Haiti wouldn't allow the tents.
Right. So it's not just Haiti. There are a lot of countries, there are some countries we work in where they would rather not have tents because it becomes a management problem. So from Shelterbox's viewpoint, the best thing we can do if we're using tents is put it on the person's home property. We don't want to build a camp. That's the last thing we want to do because we don't do camp management.
Yeah.
So if you build a camp, then somebody has to take care of medical, water and sanitation. Somebody has to do camp management, and that's a lot of work for
it's like
the government.
basically setting up
it's a small
town,
city.
setting up a small city.
And so in the case of Haiti, they just didn't want more tents in there.
Because there were still tents.
There were still people living from 2010 quake in tents and other structures that weren't fixed. And in the case of Haiti and a couple other places we go, the tarp is a better proposition because they can use it to reinforce their house. Right. So the way we got to the shelter kit, which is basically tarps, tools, and fixings, is during Haiyan, which was the typhoon in the Philippines.
Yeah.
We spent 2 or 3 months there on 3 different islands. We spent 6 months there on 3 different islands. And there were people that we couldn't help because they didn't have enough damage to warrant a tent.
Yeah.
Because we have a criteria we go through. But a tarp would have helped.
Sure.
And so the shelter kit kind of came out of that. In the case of the Philippines, we ended up buying tarps on the market.
Sure.
But that's where the tarps came from. So in Haiti, not to jump to the beginning, but in Haiti, we worked with a partner in country.
Okay.
So we started off, 4 of us deployed, 3 from England, me from the U.S., to Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic. We wanted to get in the same time zone as Haiti, and we wanted to start the work before we went in because we knew there were problems in Haiti.
Yeah.
Haiti's quite unstable right now. Their president was assassinated.
Yeah, that's
there's a lot of internal government strife that we don't want to get involved in, and the gangs are doing a lot of stuff there. So it's quite a sketchy place. For us. So we started in Santo Domingo, and we started working two teams. So myself and my partner Kitty, who's a logistics specialist, we started working on getting the kit in country.
Yeah.
And we brought in 71 tons of aid into Haiti.
Excuse me.
And it came from here in Panama. We have a warehouse we share with the UN and the International Federation of Red Cross in Panama.
Is that in Cologne?
No, it's in Panama City. It's in the free zone.
Oh, okay.
So we don't have to export it because it's
right.
Yeah.
Sure.
So we had to work with that, and because the area that the water port is in is fairly unstable, we brought it in by air. So we brought in 70 tons by air. So we had to work with partners. So Kitty and I were working on the requests, the customs paperwork, working with a partner called Airlink, who's a nonprofit that flies stuff for disasters, and getting that stuff in, and then working with partners in Panama to bring it in to our partners, which was Habitat for Humanity in Haiti.
Nice.
And then the other two people on the team were working on security, connections with partners with Habitat for Humanity. Had to write a memorandum of understanding about we'll do this, you'll do this.
Sure, an agreement, yeah.
So a lot of that work was done in the Dominican Republic. In security, we worked with Rotary. We worked with the local Rotary in Lakai where we were going. The president there was the same guy I met in 2016 when I was there for Hurricane Thomas, I think. And so we used him to find us someplace to stay. So, for instance, the hotel I stayed at in 2016 got knocked down by this earthquake.
Yeah.
So we used them to find us someplace to stay, and also to kind of double check the information we were getting from Habitat and from other partners on security and stuff.
Yeah. Now, is there like a central command or someone who like is a liaison between all these different groups between
the 4 people that we were there with?
Okay,
so the other 3. That's our job, is we do everything on the ground. We have an ops team in England, so there's an operations group in England which provides support for us. But once we're in the field, we pretty much run everything.
Now, is there? You mentioned the logistics and getting all this aid in by boat, right? Because
we flew
by air because
came
there
in
was
by air.
Do the individual countries you work with have a streamlined
Yes.
customs guy?
Yeah.
I've traveled and I know just sometimes getting suitcases through customs is just a horror show.
Typically during a disaster, we always ask to come. We don't just barge into countries.
Sure, yeah.
We need to be asked in. Usually, if it's a big event, a big disaster, they'll set up a one-stop shop. So they'll bring all their customs people to one place, as opposed to normal operations. It's spread out throughout the port.
Layered, yeah.
So they bring in a one-stop shop, and they did here for us to bring in. And we weren't the only ones. The UN was there.
Sure, yeah.
There's about 650,000 people in need from that event. We helped 2,000 people. Yeah. So there's a lot of other agencies coming in to help also.
Well, a lot of these countries, their structures aren't built to withstand even a mild earthquake.
And Haiti's had a lot of issues. They have they're on earthquake faults. They get hit by hurricanes quite a bit.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure Shelterbox, I think we've been there 6 times since 2010, mostly for hurricanes.
Yeah. So now this stuff is flown. Is it flown into Haiti or is it flown into the DR?
Flown into Haiti.
It's flown into Haiti.
That would be another customs mess if we flew it into the DR and then out of the DR. Yeah, so it was flying into Port-au-Prince.
Yeah. So when I guess they're in containers or pallets.
They're in pallets.
They're pallets. Yeah. Well, that's air cargo's pallets.
Yeah.
So you mentioned you needed a security team. What are some of the things that you guys face trying to get this aid from the airport to where it has to go?
So that's a really good point. So we fly into Port-au-Prince, which is the capital of Haiti, and then the area we're serving is called Lakai, and it's in the south part of the country, and it's about a 6-hour drive.
Okay.
It's a 40-minute plane flight. It's kind of like going from here to Panama City. It's a 40-minute flight or a 6-hour drive.
Yeah.
And the gangs are in the area, so we work with Habitat for Humanity. And one of the reasons we work with them is we've worked with them before. If you remember last November, we had the double hurricane that hit Nicaragua, Honduras.
Yeah.
So we work with them.
Well, we caught the tail end of that.
Right, we caught the tail end of that, but they caught the brunt.
Yeah.
And so we worked with them on that and a couple other places. So they're already on the ground. We're people from another country and coming in. It takes us a while to figure the place out, and we're only there 3 weeks, and then another team comes in. So they're already on the ground working, and they're working with the people in that area that we want to serve. They build houses. That's what they do. So they were our partner, and once we brought the gear in, we transferred it to them, and they got it down to Lakai. They're able to drive places that I can't go.
Yeah, well, no, that's
and
a
so
reality.
That's why we use partners in country, and we do that in every country that we go to for everything from drivers to interpreters, places to stay. I've slept in people's houses before.
Yeah.
So it's really important to have that partner in that country.
Yeah. And a lot of people, I don't think a lot of people realize the prevalence of gangs in Central and South America and Mexico as well. I mean, you always hear about Mexico, but
and the U.S.
Well, yeah, that's true too. But we're kind of fortunate here in Panama. I was down here in the early '80s, and it was a completely different place. And I think a lot of people may not realize the danger that's involved in making that 6 hour drive. So what are some of the things that you have to watch out for, that you have to deal with?
So one of the things that we do, because we're a small group, usually, as I said, 2 to 4 of us, we spend a lot of time on security for ourselves and for our kit. If you consider a shelter box is worth $1,000, in some countries that's annual income for a person. Absolutely. So we have to be really careful. So we want to do a few things. We want to understand the immediate situation locally. You said a minute ago, what's a average or typical, and there isn't one. So we really, and that's a mindset we don't want to have. We want to know, can we get there safely? Sure. Can our kit get there safely? Does the government want us in there? Yeah. Are there restrictions the government has? We want to understand what the people need. As I said a while ago, it used to be we had a box, and if that didn't work, I'm sorry. Yeah. So we really look at what do the people need in the area. An example of that is I went to Serbia for flooding, and they were doing okay. And what they really needed, because they lost their power stations in the flood, so they needed lights. So we brought in the biggest thing they needed was solar lights, and that's what we brought in. So we want to understand what the people want. We don't want to just throw a tarp at them. We want to say, okay, so what do you need? So we want to look at that, do a full assessment. So it's the earthquake happened, and we probably didn't get aid on the ground for about 3 weeks, which is really fast when you consider coming in from another country. We want to make sure we get to the right place. Yeah. A lot of times you'll see in disaster, people start at the flagpole, like where the planes land. Right. We look at where is nobody serving. So we can go as far away, because we're small, we can go as far away from the airport as possible and start serving people who the bigger agencies will take a while to get to. So we want to make sure we get to the right place. And we also want to coordinate with those other agencies, because we don't want to serve this family and then have another agency come in and give them the same stuff. So we want to coordinate with whoever's on the ground. And I already talked about partnerships. That's really important to us. Our partnership with Rotary, partnership with Airlink that flew the stuff in, partnership with Habitat for Humanity. The thing about Rotary, and you mentioned earlier, I'm a Rotarian, I have been for almost 10 years. When I go somewhere, I typically look on the app. There's an app for Rotary. You can look up a club and send them an email and say, here we come, and here's what we need. And that's what we did in Haiti. So partnerships are really, really important. And it's not just us giving aid, transferring aid to somebody. We actually flew into Haiti and went down and trained Habitat, train their engineers on how to use our kit properly. Wow. It's really important, because they're engineers and they build houses and they have a schematic to build it, and we don't have a schematic because the tarps are large enough that you can pull them apart. You can use walls, roofs. So you have to meet the need of the family, not a schematic. So we went down and did the training, and then security. I keep talking about that. And Shelterbox is really big on protecting us. So can we get to the airport safely? Right. Can we get from the airport to the hotel safely? Can we get from the airport to the area we're working in safely? So we're really big on that. Is our kit, our aid, going to be stored someplace secure, not just parked in a field somewhere where it can be pilfered? So those are kind of the things we look at as we go into a country to kind of get started. And typically, so this is my first time on Team 1. It was really interesting for me. I'm usually Team 2 or 3 farther back doing the aid. Well, I'm the one doing the aid. So this time I was the one that was bringing stuff in, and I never got to see it.
Yeah. So that's you basically on the first step.
Yep.
The first stage.
We were the first team in. So
now, you mentioned that you don't just barge in. You wait for an invite. The invite. And I'm trying to parse this, okay? If you get invited by the government, if the government officially says, "Hey guys, we need you here," do they give you support? Do they help you with security?
It depends on the country. It depends on the country and the situation. I mean, some of the countries we go to, we don't really need security. It's pretty okay. So we really look to the government to give us permission. and we make sure we follow their rules, their laws. So in the case of Haiti, one of the things that we took into account for security was COVID.
Well, yeah.
COVID, Haiti is 1% vaccinated, and they're not testing. So made it really hard on us, and we're all vaccinated. It's part of the deal.
Sure.
And so made it really hard on us to assess the security health-wise for us. Haiti is not a country that I want to catch COVID in.
No.
And have to stay for 2 weeks.
No,
So we were cross-testing every other day. Two of us were testing ourselves every other day, and we had to get tested to fly in, and we had to get tested to fly out of Haiti back to the Dominican Republic, but I didn't have to come here.
Well, I mean, nothing like throwing a pandemic in the middle of a natural disaster, right?
Well, actually, Al, this is the first time that Shelterbox is deployed since the pandemic. Britain's been locked down harder than the U.S. or Panama, or about as hard as Panama. And so we were the first team in the field since the pandemic. We've been working through partners. We realized that because of the pandemic, we couldn't stop helping people. So we've gotten really good about working with partners remotely. And part of this deployment was obviously remote because we were in Santo Domingo for a while. And so COVID has caused us to add things like masks, soap, things we don't normally put in a kit.
Alcohol, I guess.
So we've added COVID items to all of our stuff that we send into places.
Well, it's hard enough, controlling a pandemic or attempting to control a pandemic in a society that is, by and large, willing.
Right.
But when you have either a lack of education or just a lack of information.
Right.
Combined with
infrastructure,
and combined with a hurricane or an earthquake, it's I'd imagine that it's very, very difficult to get all this together and working in concert.
It is,
especially with the state that international travel is in.
Right. Definitely.
Just getting around, is difficult.
It's a challenge.
So, did you have the cooperation of the Haitian government with this? Because I know their government is a little in flux right now.
Yeah, they're in flux right now. But the people taking care of the disaster side of it are holding meetings with the agencies, the UN, us, other agencies that are in there.
Well, you'd like to think that
Customs is the government. I mean, so yeah.
You like to think that if your country is really, really hard hit by any natural disaster, that the government is going to do whatever they can and accept whatever help they can to get their infrastructure rebuilt and get housing and all that done. Have you been in an area or have you experienced with being in a country where there's hostility against what you're trying?
No, I have not.
Because you hear about that.
And we do end up in some of those places. So Syria, the Syrian crisis is our longest running event. So we have been working on the Syrian crisis since it began, both in Syria and outside of Syria. So we've built camps, the things I said we don't like to do, in concert with others in Lebanon, in Turkey, and in Iraq for people leaving Syria. And that's a case where the government's not helping us because it's Syria. But in the country, we work with partners in Syria for people who stay. And we don't use our normal Shelterbox kit because I talked about Rotary being, a really big part of where we came from. We're not part of Rotary, but that's where we came from.
Sure, yeah.
So a lot of our kit has the Rotary emblem on it.
Oh, nice.
And that's just to pay homage from where we came from. That we came from a Rotary club. So we use something different in interior of Syria. We look at blankets. We look at heaters. Plastic sheeting to cover the windows because they've been blown out, and we use partners to do that. So there's no Shelterbox people going into Syria.
Well, it's, and I know this. This is you're just trying to help people. Just trying to help the individuals and families, and I think it's very easy, especially for those of us from North America, to look at a people group and say, well, why are we helping them? We're at war with them. Sometimes you just got to realize, the military is at war with the military. These are folks just like you and me. They're not after anything but trying to get their homes rebuilt and trying to live some semblance, of a normal life.
And that's what we want to do. We want to help them get back to some semblance of normal life.
Yeah.
And in the case of Haiti, so we're helping 2,000 families through Habitat for Humanity in Haiti. And then the plan is the Habitat for Humanity is going to target some of those families to build them a house.
An actual physical
An
structure.
actual physical structure, not what you and I think of a house, a small structure, but
Sure.
but they build houses up in the mountains in the damage zone where the roads were pretty much destroyed and the houses didn't fall. So they built some really solid homes. So they're a really good partner for us because they build houses.
Yeah.
And so by helping these 2,000 families, they'll take a percent. They're not going to build houses for all of them. They just don't have the time or the
resources.
money.
Yeah.
But they're going to look at the ones that need the most help, which is what we do.
Yeah.
We know we can't help everybody, but we need to help the ones that are in the most need.
Well, if there's so much devastation, especially in 2010. That was in Port-au-Prince.
That was in Port-au-Prince, and so this one that was a 7.0,
Yeah.
and this one was 7.2, which is way worse than 7.0. But it was in the ocean off of Lacaille, which is not
as heavily.
Yeah, if it had been in the middle of Port-au-Prince, it'd been a different story.
Yeah, I can't even imagine.
Yeah,
I look at photos and video of this earthquake, and and it's just one of those things that I'm personally interested in. Is how the logistics involved in getting to some of these places. Sometimes we think. The road isn't good going up to Jaramillo, and you can complain about that if you want.
I can't complain because I live up there, so
it's beautiful up there.
I know.
But the logistics of just getting humans to some of these remote places is difficult enough. But now you have aid, you have containers, you have boxes, you have food, supplies, and all that. And getting through. I remember our family in '68. This town that we lived in Italy, in Sicily, was hit by a 8.2. It was flattened. And this is Santa Margherita, which is in the mountains.
Right.
It's difficult to get to even on a good day. And I remember that. And I can't remember because I was very young, but. Aid organizations came in, and we were just amazed. That these people are showing up. As far as we knew, we were forgotten. There's no Palermo is hundreds of miles away, and nobody ever. When we had to go get major supplies, we had to go down from that mountain down into Capri di Leone where it was flat, and we were just absolutely. It's hard to be happy during when your house is knocked down. And there's probably a better word for it, but seeing that we're not forgotten, that people haven't forgotten about us, that people care about us, that it didn't matter who we were, what we look like. These organizations are coming in to make sure we have food, to make sure that we have some semblance of a roof over our head, clean water, and the feeling that you get is it goes beyond gratitude. It's to the point where it's life-saving. Like, if these people hadn't come in, you can't see how would you survive without water, without food, without, just even the basics, shelter.
Right.
So, excuse me, I smoke way too much. So, your partnerships, you mentioned Habitat for Humanity, which is a internationally known and very well-respected organization.
Absolutely.
As you might know, our former president, Jimmy Carter, is very involved with them, from my home state of Georgia, by the way. This Airlink?
Airlink.
Are they an international organization that does this too?
Yep. Yeah.
I can't imagine the complexity of coordinating all of this.
It is very complex. There's a lot of time. I don't know how they did it before computers. We spend a lot of time.
I say that a lot, though. Don't we say that?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. But that's what we did for 2 weeks is we sat in a room and we talked to people on the phone. We did forms, did stuff online, looked things up, and just getting the basic electronic paperwork together.
Yeah.
To get it released from Panama from the UN warehouse, to get it to the plane at the right time, to get it on the plane at the right time so the plane can take off when it's scheduled, to land, to have somebody there to meet it,
to receive the goods,
to receive the stuff, and get it through customs. It's a lot of steps that we have to line up, and as you can imagine, if one of them, doesn't work out, it costs more money.
Well, sure,
Typically, when you're shipping stuff through an airport system, those trucks only make money when they're moving.
Yeah.
And so if they have to wait because you goofed up the time, then you have to pay for that time sitting.
Yeah, yeah.
And
they're
so
not volunteers.
Right, they're not volunteers.
Yeah.
And so, that kind of leads to where our money comes from. Shelterbox is a nonprofit, a charity in England, nonprofit in the U.S. There are about 14 affiliate countries that work with Shelterbox in the UK. So Shelterbox in the UK, in Cornwall, is our headquarters. And then in the US we have an affiliate, and there's affiliates in Germany and a bunch of the European countries, Australia, New Zealand. And what the affiliates do is they do fundraising and volunteer management. So all of us are volunteers that are response team members. But in the US there's also a small group of volunteers that are ambassadors, and they do what I'm doing right now, is go out and talk about Shelterbox and help raise money. Shelterbox doesn't take any government money.
Right. I was going to ask about that.
Yeah, everybody always does. So the main reason for that is anytime you take money from a government organization, there are strings tied to it. Only used in this place.
Right. Yeah.
It has to be done by this date, and we are very flexible.
So it places limitations on what you can do and where you can go.
Yeah. We don't want. In the case of Syria, that's different. We do targeted fundraising for Syria, but not for any place else right now. Syria is not going anywhere anytime soon, and there's a lot of people in need. But as an example, during the Nepal quake a few years ago, I was still in Seattle, and I had 15 requests from Rotary clubs for me to come speak because they wanted to donate to the event. And I had to tell all 15 clubs that we'd love for you to donate to Shelterbox, but you cannot donate directly to the Nepal event because stuff's already on the way.
Right.
So we're always fundraising for the next event.
Sure.
We don't want to wait till it happens to fundraise.
Well, no, you have to be proactive. Right. Yeah, I mean, you don't know when a disaster is going to strike. So
we're always fundraising
can't schedule
for the
an
next.
earthquake.
Can't do that. Hurricanes? No, you can't do that either. So we're always fundraising for the next event. And so Haiti has depleted some of our kit here in Panama, and so now we're fundraising to refill that.
So what does Shelterbox do to fundraise? I mean, are there events, or is it just an ongoing?
It's just an ongoing within the UK and within the US. They have major gift officers. As I said, in the US, I hope I got this number right. It used to be right. About 40% of the money that the US raises for Shelterbox comes from Rotary clubs and individuals in Rotary.
Wow.
And so that money's transferred to UK to fund our operations because it pays for the kit, pays for the training of the SRTs, pays for us while we're on the ground. And so that's really important, that fundraising arm. And that's one of the reasons that I go out and talk about Shelterbox is because we are funded, by donations. And that's also, just to tie that up, that's also why we learn casework, because we want to report back to the donors that we didn't just dump this stuff on a runway somewhere.
Right.
This went to this family. This went to this family.
Oh, that's nice.
So we're able to say we helped 2,000 people.
Yeah.
And so, again, another thing we train our partners on is collecting that data for us to feed back to the donors.
Yeah, and in places like Syria, that poses a particular problem because it's ongoing, and there's not really what you would call government cooperation, and there's a lot of political unrest.
There's about 12 million people in Syria right now that are displaced or can't go on with their daily lives because of what's going on in Syria.
And you look at that and you think, how can I make a dent in this? In a case like Haiti, there are still people that are in need from the 2010 quake,
and
right?
from the hurricanes in between.
Yeah. I know it's easy to get discouraged. Obviously, it's a horrible situation, but yet this has to be done. Mm-hmm. Is there any link between? Because I know that you told me Shelterbox was there in 2010. Shelterbox was there. It was 2014.
I was there in 16. They've been there 6 times, but I was there personally in 16.
Is there any like if you go into an area that you've helped before, and you run into?
I did. Lakai.
All right. So do you run into people who are still?
So they asked me that in the debriefing. So Lakai was hit by a hurricane, so it's a different kind of damage from an earthquake, and so we helped a lot of people with tarps because that's the first place we ran into. They wouldn't allow us to bring tents in. Yeah. So for me, going back to Lakai and seeing the area, it looked quite the same as it did when I was there in 16. Yeah. As a response team member, you pretty soon realize that a lot of times there's nothing coming behind you. We're doing immediate shelter after a disaster, which doesn't always lead to something else. And
Sure.
and one of the things I always tell people in the U.S. is we don't respond in the U.S. I think we responded 2 or 3 times in the U.S. Katrina, some other small
those
ones.
major.
But the reason we don't is the U.S. they have FEMA, they have the Red Cross, Salvation Army. A lot of these countries don't have that, and so there's no safety net going in. And so I know that countries I've been in that I've helped people, that may have been the last
the last thing they
may
got.
still be,
They may still be. Yeah.
So sometimes the countries reach out and help the people, and sometimes they just don't have the means to do it.
Yeah, and that's something that I think it's important to understand is that when you see a country, a developing nation, or even a nation that's stagnant, mm-hmm. That seems to not care about their people. How come they're not doing more? How come they're not providing? People don't understand. It's not that they don't want to. Mm-hmm. They just don't have the resources.
Sometimes you're just overwhelmed.
It's an economic disaster, not mm-hmm. just a physical disaster.
Right.
I can imagine. I know that in Italy the government was limited to what it could do.
Mm-hmm.
There was there was just not enough resources to go around, not enough money to go around.
Right.
There's obviously businesses, jobs, and all that is taken into account.
Absolutely.
But it's always good to know that there are organizations like Shelterbox, like Habitat for Humanity, and the like that are always willing, almost in spite of the difficulty of what's getting done, to come in and help. Mm-hmm. And that's really good to hear. And I do a post-show production, put the video up and all that. So whatever information that you have, phone numbers and all that, send me all that. I'll put that out. We got a few minutes left, so I want to give that time to you. We've kind of been here and there as things pop into my head. Is there anything that you wanted to
I think one of the things that I do want to touch on is the things that are going on. Often we go places, and when I come back, people are like, "Why'd you go to that country?" I'm like, "They had an earthquake, a disaster, or whatever." So there are a lot of forgotten places. Syria is one of them, and I've talked about that. That's our longest running event. There's also the Lake Chad region in Africa, sometimes referred to as the Forgotten Crisis. Nigeria, Cameroon, and Niger, and Chad. So they're all around Lake Chad, and there's several layers of disaster there. Lake Chad is shrunk something like 80% because of lack of rain, and that's the water that all the people in that area use. Plus Boko Haram.
That's their water supply.
Yeah. So plus Boko Haram has come through there and caused issues. So we've been working in that area for quite a few years. About 17 million people in the affected area. Wow. Way more than we can help. And again, we know that going in to every disaster because we just don't have enough money. So we really look at who's the most affected, and who's least able to recover on their own.
Yeah.
So again, we want to make sure we're serving the right people. Ethiopia's someplace we've been working, and Mozambique.
Yeah, Ethiopia's had many problems on and off for decades.
Yeah. And I talked earlier about Eta and Iota, the hurricanes that came through there. It's the strongest there. And Habitat Humanity International helped us with 3,200 households during that event, and we worked with the Rotary Club there to do that. So
cool.
Yeah.
Bolivar, how much time we got left, my friend?
We got 1 minute.
1 minute.
1 minute.
We're down to the last minute. All right. Well, I want to first thank earlier Priscilla Gomez for coming on the show, and
I'm hungry now.
Nodri Cocina Panamena. Haha, you like that? And
He worked on that. For
she's
quite a
out
while.
there going.
She's out there.
And thanks. I can't thank you enough, Dave Nichols from Shelterbox, for coming out and talking to us. You know, there's that phrase that we use, whether we're religious or not, we say there, but for the grace of God go I. And, you know, we have a lot to be thankful for.
We do.
In this country, it may not be the wealthiest, but that we're very organized here. And when we have trouble here, it is addressed.
Absolutely.
You know, on behalf of someone who had been at one point needing that kind of help,
amazing.
you know, thank you for everything that
Well,
you
I appreciate it. I
guys do.
really appreciate you having me on to talk about it. I just, again, as we're not a very large organization, I want to take every chance I can to really talk about what we do because I think it's important.
It is important.
So thank you, Al.
You're very welcome. You've been listening to BoqueteNOW Talk Radio on Radio Cherokee 103.3 FM, sponsored by Big Daddy's Grill and ACC B in Boquete. Thank you very much for your time and attention. Have a wonderful, wonderful week. Pasa un buen día.